There you go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Commissioners, Secretariat staff, Conference Board and PAG members. So we're going to do things a little differently. Instead of going through the whole report, which is kind of lengthy, we're just going to go through Appendix 4 of the report, which just has the recommendations. But I will note that for the first time, like everyone has been noted before, that this is the first meeting in person since 2020. I'm pleasantly surprised we had as many participants. Like we had 24 membership from Canada and 32, I think, from the U.S. So, start right out with the management strategy evaluation. So the Conference Board recommended the Commission address the decision points from paper IPHC 2023 AM099-13 during a special session that allows public input and time to develop an MSc program of work for 2023. Canada in favor of 23, 0 against, 1 abstention, and the U.S. in favor of 25, 0 against, and 5 abstentions. There was a lot of there's a lot of new material or things that people hadn't had time to really digest from that, and they thought a special session would be helpful to allow people to work through it and get more comfortable with some of the recommendations that were coming from the Secretariat. The Conference Board also recommended there be no reduction in the MSAB term limits for members, noting that there are not many applicants, and the understanding the MSc takes time to sort of get up to speed about what's going on. Canada in favor of 5, 1 against, and 18 abstentions, and the U.S. 20 in favor, 1 against, and 9 abstained. As well as with the MSAB, the Conference Board recommended not reducing the number of member seats, noting the importance of geographical representation. Canada, didn't pass in Canada. There was 0 in favor of this, 14 against, and 10 abstentions. And the U.S., there's 27 in favor, 0 against, and 3 abstentions. Fishing periods and open dates. It's a little different this year. So the Conference Board noted from the Canadian members, they recommended the following fishing periods for 2023, opening 4th of March and closing the 7th of December. The Conference Board from the U.S. members recommended the fishing period of opening March 4th or 11th and closing on December 7th. So if it didn't go to March 4th because of tides and other issues, they decided on March 11th. Mortality limits. The Conference Board noted a motion from the Canadian delegation to reduce the coastwide TCEY from 10% from the adopted 2022 levels for a coastwide TCEY of 37.1 million pounds. Canada needs to be part of the reduction and recommended a 10% reduction for Canada from its adopted 2022 TCEY for Canada to bring it to 6.80 million pounds. And that Canada So we're missing a.
Here's this. We skip the U.S. recommendation.
Yeah, sorry. We the actual recommendation and motion from the U.S. for mortality limits didn't make it onto the paper.
I don't know where you want to start. You could. This is the U.S. delegation comment. So I'd start there.
Yeah. Conference Board noted the following motion from the USA Conference Board members for coastwide TCY as follows. TCY of 2020, TCY 1.65 for 2A, 5.851 for 2C, 12.368 for 3A, 4.080 for 3B, 1.785 for 4A, 1.45 for 4B, and 3.845 for 4C, D, and E. This resulted in a reduction of in the U.S. waters of 2.62 million pounds, or an 8 point, was it 4?
8 million, and then we should read this as the rationale.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't read rationale for others. Anyways, so about just over 8% reduction overall coastwide. Are we back up? Okay.
We did give Canadian rationale.
Did I? Okay. Where does it go? So the CB noted that, which rationale do you want to read? We're not going through the whole thing.
No, I guess not. I just go on.
Yeah, okay. So where's the vote on this one? So for the vote for Canada, 0 in favor, 24 abstained, 24 against and 0 abstained. In the US, there was 30 in favor, 0 against, and 1 abstention. For fishery regulation,
Yeah, so then we're into fishery.
yeah, proposal Prop A1 with the adoption of the mortality limits for each contracting party by the sector as detailed in section 5.3, but also include all mortality, e.g. subsistence, bycatch, and non-guided sport in the annual summary framework table. So that was passed unanimously on both sides. For regulatory proposal Prop A2, which specified fishing periods. Oh, a little too. Why is this not working? I see why people were having a hard problem with the mouse the other 2 days. Which specify fishing periods for the commercial Pacific halibut fisheries and see section 4 for summary of the discussions. So it's passed unanimously. Fishery regulations, license vessels for IPHC regulator 2A, accommodation of the transition of management in the IPHC regulatory 2A. So CB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulating proposal Prop 3A3 to accommodate the transition of management in the IPHC regulatory 2A from the IPHC to Pacific Fisheries Management Council and NOAA Fisheries. That passed unanimously on both sides. Fishery regular minor amendments. The CB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulation proposal Prop A4 Rev-1 that proposed minor amendments to the existing IPHC fishery regulations to improve clarity and consistency. So that passed unanimously on both sides. Recreational sports fishing of Pacific halibut, charter management measures in IPHC regulatory area 2C and 3A. The CB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt the fishery regulation proposal Prop B1 that proposed IPHC regulation changes for charter recreational Pacific halibut fisheries in IPHC regulatory area 2C and 3A in order to achieve the charter Pacific halibut allocations under the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council's Pacific halibut catch sharing plan. Canada abstained, and it was unanimous on the U.S. side. Onboard consumption. Proposition B3. The conference board noted and recommended that the Commission adopt the fishery regulator proposal Prop B3 that proposed adding flexibility to existing recreational Pacific halibut fishing regulations in Alaska regulatory areas to allow limited consumption of recreational Pacific halibut on board charter vessels and pleasure craft while retaining existing regulations that provide effective enforcement of daily bag limits and possession limits. Canada in favor 1, against 10, abstain 11, and USSA in favor 28, against 2, 2 abstained. Regulations, log requirements, Prop B4. So the Conference Board noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulation proposal Prop B4 that proposes to update the IPHC regulatory language regarding the qualifying logbooks in IPHC area 2A. And that was passed unanimously by all.
I am going to read the motion. I just going to, Linda Benkin from U.S. co-chair, I am going to go back to the mortality limit. Unfortunately, the U.S. motion was left out of the appendix, which neither of us realized till we got up here. I do want to read the motion. I think Jim read out the numbers, but the motion was USA recommends that the 2023 TCYs be based on 2022 TCYs reduced by the 2022 survey change in weight per unit effort, with a max change per area of 15%. Minor adjustments to the rule have been made in some areas. The USA noted this approach is transparent, linked to the FIS, defensible, and easily understood. And I would just add that there's a huge amount of rationale for both sides and the motions that were made on the FIS. Also, a fair bit of discussion we captured around the MSE and the MSAB, this or the meeting that's been special session that's been requested, and what people were hoping would be discussed at that I hope you get a chance to look over.
All right, thanks very much, Linda and Jim. I'll just see if there's any questions for you on the Conference Board report. Not seeing any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Oh, one sec.
Excuse me. I was curious on the opening dates from the U.S., March 4th or March 11th. Was that a minority voted for the March 4th and a majority voted for the March 11th? Or how? I don't know how to interpret what's being said there.
I think I can answer. So it was an odd vote, and so the March 4th one, it passed in the U.S., but not by much, like by 1 or 2. And then when it came to vote on the March 11th, the March 4th, that one also passed in the U.S. by like 1 or 2 votes. So we thought it best so there didn't seem to be anything that was clearly a preference, at least by voting either March 4th or March 11th.
So just to give you the vote count. So on March 4th, we had 13 in favor, 6 against, and 11 abstaining on the U.S. side. So we had so many abstentions that we voted again on the March 11th. That one was 11 in favor, 8 against, and 11 abstaining. So there was sort of both votes passed, and because we were initially counting abstentions as not supporting the motion, we took a second vote and then decided if people were abstaining because they didn't want to take a position or think it was appropriate as a charter association, for example, to take a position, that they would just say present instead of abstain.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
This abstention thing, curious. So, just to make sure I understand, you were treating an abstention as opposition?
No.
No, I think usually, well, at least in our practice in our country under Robert's rules, the abstentions are not counted as in favor of the motion. And we had more abstentions than we had yes votes. And we were not sure how to interpret that. And then when we realized that most of the people were abstaining, not because they didn't have a good sense of what the motion was about or the impacts, but rather that they thought it was inappropriate, because it didn't affect them as a charter association, for example, to take a position, that they were abstaining. So we decided to say after that, say present rather than abstain, so we know how to interpret the vote.
Any more questions? No. Thank you very much. Can I have the chairs of PAB come up and provide the report, please?
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioners. We're going to follow a similar format that the conference board just did, but we're not going to have it up on the screen because we're going to jump up a little bit, but we're basically starting on page 12 with the appendix. We're just going to scroll around a little bit. Just to note, when the meeting started, Mr. Carl Nordman was elected chairperson from Canada, and Vice Chair Ms. Jessie Keplinger from the United States. There were 4 members from Canada attending and 12 members from the United States. Fishing period, season opening dates, and closing dates. The PAB recommended the following fishing period dates for 2023. Opening March 10th, Canada in favor 1, 3 against, US in favor 12, 0 against. Closing date, November 10th, Canada in favor 1, against 3, US in favor 12. Just to note that the Canadian members that voted against these opening dates wanted a longer season, closing on November 30th. Mortality limits. The PAB recommended the following TCEY mortality limits for the 2023 fishing period as provided in Table 1, which translates the mortality estimates by sector. It's provided by the IPHC Secretariat, approved in Appendix 3, and an SBR 53, in favor 16. Those TCEY breakdowns by regulatory area for 2A is 1.65 million pounds, 2B 6.96, 2C 5.85, 3A 12.37, 3B 4.08, 4A 1.79, 4B 1.45, 4C, D, and E 3.85 for a total TCEY of 38 million pounds. The PAB noted in IPHC fishery regulations, mortality and fishery limits. The PAB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulation proposal Prop A1, and that was unanimous. The PAB IPHC fishery regulations commercial fishing periods. The PAB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulation proposal Prop A2. That vote was unanimous in favor. IPHC regulation fishing period limits, Section 14, and licensing vessels for IPHC regulatory area 2A. Accommodation for the transition of management in the IPHC regulatory area 2A. The PAB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt the fishery regulation proposal Prop A3, in favor unanimous. IPHC fishery regulation minor amendments. The PAB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulation proposal Prop A4, in favor 16 unanimous. IPHC fishery regulation logs log requirements. The PAB noted and recommended that the Commission adopt fishery regulation proposal Prop B4. In favor 16, the vote was unanimous. Rules of procedure PAB. The PAB recommended to approve accreditation for industry associations that represent Pacific halibut processors from both Canada and the U.S. as members with voting participation. For as far back as the PAB members can remember, these associations have always been allowed to be members of the PAB, and we see no reason to change that at this time. These groups play an important role in providing pertinent information regarding meetings and dates, communication of issues and concerns in the industry, as well as assisting in introducing processing participants to the IPHC process and each other. In favor, 16. The vote was unanimous. The PAB recommended that a working group be convened over the next 6 months to discuss A, PAB rules of operation under Robert's Rule of Order. In favor, 16, unanimous. B, accreditation form. C, suggest a timeline of proposed changes to give to the commissioners. And D, voting members. The PAB recommended the following regarding proxy voting. Proxies are allowed from accredited members from the PAB. Only one proxy per member is allowed. Change to only one proxy per attending member. Proxies will be submitted to the IPHC Secretariat prior to the PAB meeting in written or electronic form. A general proxy will authorize a designated PAB member to vote on any or all topics brought before the PAB on behalf of a PAB member who cannot attend. A specific proxy will authorize a PAB member to vote on specifically named topics listed on the proxy itself or on behalf of the PAB member who cannot attend. Other key actions. The PAB endorsed all proposed changes to the rules of procedure contained in IPHC FAC 099-09 with the modification as prescribed in paragraph 35 in the report. In favor, 16, against 0. Requests. The PAB opposed the recommendation of the MSAB to reduce specific halibut size limits and requested the commission note. The PAB believes that the value in the marketplace of Pacific halibut smaller than 32 inches will significantly lower the value of a fish 32 inches or over and much less than the projected value used in the MSE modeling. The recovery rates on smaller fish are low. This change would likely cause changes in fishing behavior, which need further analysis and discussion. Results from the MSAB evaluation suggested that removing the size limit over the long term can impact the age and size density in the biomass, i.e. the percentage of older fish. Larger individuals would decline while the percentage of small fish would increase. We don't yet know what the long-term impacts on a full range of halibut and the sustainability of less diverse biomass in the future. PAB is strongly against fishing U32 fish. The PAB encouraged further consideration before moving from an annual to triennial stock assessment. While there may be advantages in doing the full stock assessment less frequently, including the potential for less extreme changes from one year to the next, there is also potential for unexpectedly large changes at the end of a 3-year period. In the time of rapid climate and ecosystem changes, annual stock assessments may remain the more prudent choice. In addition, we need more information on how it will affect the IPHC regulatory area specific TCEY and suggest identifying fluctuations in the FIS that would cause enough concern to trigger a biological risk and initiate a full stock assessment in off years. The PAB expressed its appreciation for the assistance provided by the IPHC Secretariat and for in-session presentations and support by Andrea Kaiklika, Monica Tom Kong, Robert Teens, Dr. David Wilson, Dr. Ian Stewart, Dr. Alan Hicks, Dr. Batsa Hutzniak, and the Secretariat support behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from commissioners? No, I don't see any. Thank you very much for your concise report.
Thank you.
I mean, we have a scheduled break right now. Do we want to take it? There was a scheduled break right now, but I think we just keep going. Sorry, I was just looking at the agenda. We had a scheduled break, but given the rapidity with which we went through both Conference Board and PAB's reports, I think we're just going to keep going. So, Basha, you're going to come up and walk us through the regulatory proposals.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Basia Hutniczak, Fisheries Policy Branch Manager. I will now walk the Commission through the regulatory proposals. And as a reminder, we have 11 regulatory proposals this year on the table for the Commission, and we would like to take action on as many of them as possible today. As we already discussed all these proposals in detail, I will just today provide a brief introduction to each proposal, just to remind everybody what each proposal is about. And for reference, I will ask our team to bring the suggested regulatory language for reference to the screen. Per Commission's request, we'll defer proposal A1 to tomorrow when we will be discussing mortality limits. So we will start with proposal A2. And if we could bring the appendix of proposal A2 to the screen. This proposal specifies periods for the directed commercial fishing within IPHC Fishery Regulations Section 9. As a reminder, there is no need for considering dates for the 2A non-triable commercial directed commercial fishery should the Commission decides to adopt this proposal that defers this decision for 2A to NOAA fisheries. The Commission can make the decision on the entire proposal, but also defer the dates within this proposal and adopt the remainder of this proposal that specifically includes also a component of the 2A transition of management from the IPHC to Pacific Fisheries Management Council and NOAA fisheries. So we have this proposal here on the screen, and I give it over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Can you read that down there? Sorry, we can't read what's on the screen right now. We're just trying to get it blown up so we can read it. John, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you. I would move that we approve the portion of this other than the fishing dates, but moving the portion that helps to effectuate the transfer of management from the IPHC to NIMS West Coast region.
Right. Any comments or questions on that? Does anyone wish to make a motion?
I thought I had.
Anyone wish to second? Thank you. Are there any opposed? So we would pass, John.
Thank you. We can move now to proposal A3. This proposal accommodates the remaining components of the transition of management in the IPHC regulatory area 2A. And as it was described already on Tuesday, this includes a component related to issuing permits and regulating fishing period limits in IPHC regulatory area 2A. And we should have this proposal's appendix on the screen shortly. Over to you, Chair.
Sorry, does anyone wish to speak to this? John,
I have a motion, if I may, Mr. Chair.
please go ahead.
I move that the commission adopt regulatory proposal A3, and likewise with that portion of A2. This is to effectuate the transfer of management from IPHC to the National Marine Fishery Service West Coast region and our partners with the Pacific Fishery Management Council.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions or comments? Do I have a seconder? Bob? Is anyone opposed? None are opposed. It passes. So we can go to the next one.
Thank you, Chair. Proposal A4 reflects minor amendments that were prepared in collaboration with domestic agencies to offer more consistent language throughout the IPHC regulations. Details about these changes are included in the appendix of the proposal available on our website, and there's no need to bring them to the screen unless you would like to have them presented. This is just regarding the consistency of the language. Thank you, Chair.
I don't see any need to, John. Okay. So do we need another a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to adopt the minor amendments and appreciate the staff's work on them.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Neil. Is anyone opposed? None opposed. If we can move to the next, please.
Thank you. Now moving to contracting parties' proposals and starting with proposal B1. NOAA Fisheries proposal B1 offers a framework for setting charter management measures in IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A. The decision here would be only on the framework, and the actual measures will be defined once the mortality limits are set. So we'll be now having a discussion and decision on framework only. Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Again, does someone wish to speak to this? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we adopt the framework in regulatory proposal B1.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Peter? Thank you, Peter. Is anyone opposed? No, it passes. If you could move to the next one, please, Basha.
Thank you. Moving to proposal B2. This proposal is related to a recreational bag limit in IPHC regulatory area 2B. We received today a revised version of this proposal that includes a modified language, as this should be displayed shortly on the screen. So the decision will be on this revised text presented here. Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Basha. Does anyone wish to speak to this? Neil?
Are we going to do motion and then speak? Speak and then motion. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to speak a bit to this, just to reiterate the importance of this measure to the recreational fishery. In our case, the things that are important to the recreational fishery include the opportunity and a full season, and given the catch limit they have to live within and the provisions we have in place to close them, if they hit their allocation or recoup overages, they tend to plan conservatively. So this tool gives us some flexibility to be able to adjust in season so that we are able to manage the fishery close to its allocation and adjust the rate at which catch is accruing over the course of the season. This is also in light of some things that we are not able to vary in season, things like the annual limit that the recreational fishery is subject to, each individual fisher, and the size limits. This daily limit can be varied in season, hence its importance as a tool for us. There are also a number of features of our management regime that we think enable us to make these kinds of in-season adjustments. That includes the existence of a catch limit for the recreational fishery, catch monitoring data that is available to us in season, independent verification of that catch, and a mechanism to close the fishery in season, or as I mentioned, recoup overages should they occur despite our best efforts. So it's under those conditions that this proposal is being put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. John?
Thank you. I just want to say a few words on this one as well. United States commissioners had some concerns about this as originally proposed. Folks in the audience will probably notice that this has been amended. Shifting to a 3-fish bag limit would be a big departure from the long history of a 2-fish bag limit throughout the range with potentially unintended consequences. But we appreciate the Canadian commissioners' openness to dialogue on this issue and appreciate their modifications of the proposal to limit this to August 1 or later within a season, so it can be focused on the stated purpose of facilitating utilization of the total allowable catch, rather than being a season-long change that could create a competitive marketing disadvantage for the U.S. charter sector. We also appreciate the modification to have this change be limited to be in effect for a 3-year period to allow for some assessment of potential unintended consequences. I think all 6 commissioners recognize that making a change can cause angst and uncertainty, and this will allow the commission to assess whether there are any problems and either extend the sunset date or adopt this as a permanent measure at some point in the future. So with those amendments, the U.S. commissioners support this proposal.
Thank you, John. Has anyone else wish to speak to this? Is there a motion? Neil?
I move we adopt the regulatory proposal as amended on our screen.
Thank you, Neil. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Richard. Is anyone opposed? There is no one opposed. It's adopted.
Thank you. Now we can move to Proposal B3. NOAA Fisheries Proposal B3 is to allow limited consumption of recreationally caught Pacific halibut on board charter vessel and pleasure craft in Alaska. We have here a revised wording based on the discussion with policy advisors we had yesterday that improves the readability of this amendment, but does not change the intention that was presented to the Commission on Tuesday. Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does someone wish to speak? John?
Thank you. So this proposal is to revise regulations to allow consumption of a limited amount of recreationally caught halibut on board charter vessels without disturbing existing regulations that ensure effective enforcement of a daily bag limit and possession limit. This would provide flexibility to recreational anglers via a simple and small change to existing regulations and strike a balance between recreational anglers' desire to consume recreationally caught halibut on board while also considering effective enforcement of daily bag limits and possession limits. So this proposal adds flexibility to our regulations while still maintaining effective enforcement of the daily bag and possession limits and facilitating compliance.
Thank you very much, John. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Bob. Is anyone opposed? Not seeing any. We can move to the next, please.
Thank you. In Proposal B4, NOAA Fisheries proposes allowing reporting Pacific halibut caught in IPHC Regulatory Area 2A through the Pacific Coast Groundfish Non-Trawl Logbook. Here on the screen, we have this proposed language, and over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to speak to this? John again?
So this is another step to help with effectuating the transfer of management from IPHC to the NOAA Fisheries West Coast region. And if this were adopted, I think our intent would be for agency staff and the Secretariat staff to work together on a data sharing arrangement. And with that, I move that we adopt B4.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Peter. Any opposed? Not seeing any opposition. Please move to the next one.
Thank you. Proposal C1 is related to processing of Pacific halibut caught by recreational fishermen in Alaska. We have it here now on the screen. And this is first of the stakeholders' proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Basha. John?
Thank you. So this concludes a few alternate proposals from Sport Angler for modifying existing regulations. And there are some concerns with this, with what it would mean for the NOAA Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement's ability to enforce daily bag and possession limits, and the fact that this would introduce really quite a bit of complexity and significant changes to the existing regulations. And I'll just touch on each of the components in the proposal in turn. So the first is to allow processing and consumption of halibut on board, subject to some new photographing, labeling, and logging requirements. And there are concerns there that besides undermining enforcement of daily bag and possession limits, that these measures are really quite complex and would be resource intensive for anglers and law enforcement alike. And it's really quite a unusual proposal. We're not aware of any other jurisdiction that has similar measures for recreational fisheries. As for Proposal 2, that would distinguish between preserved and unpreserved halibut for purposes of the daily bag and possession limits and exempt consumed and preserved fish from those limits. And that approach, too, would have the effect of really undermining enforceability of daily bag and possession limits, which is quite a concern. Proposal 3, which would allow anglers on pleasure craft to consume one halibut per day under a variety of circumstances, again, would add some difficult requirements, including forcing anglers who don't have size limits to keep carcasses and add an unfamiliar and unnecessary burden. So we do have some concerns about this proposal, and I would just note the proposal that the Commission just adopted for onboard consumption, which gets at some of the purposes that I think gave rise to this proposal.
Thanks very much, John, for that explanation. Do we need to have a seconder, or?
I don't
think
we're
so.
proposing any action on
Yeah,
this.
just leave it, right? Yeah.
So,
Of course, my mouse always. John, I'd like to go back to B3 just for a minute, if that's okay, the NOAA proposal. It's a point of not clarification, but communication. I just want to make sure, and we spoke about this at our meeting, there are people that transfer through Canada, through the Alaska and vice versa, going back home, if you will, that they need to obviously have if they're fishing on their way, that they need to have a license, but also that they need to comply with how the fish are treated within Canada, so that there's not potential complications as they transfer through Canada and return from the US. So I imagine you're going to be taking care of that communication, but I thought I would, while we have everyone here, just speak to that.
yeah, thanks for raising that. I do think it's important for folks to be aware, and something we will certainly consider in our outreach as this new proposal takes effect. Yeah, folks should be aware if they're following, just as with any move from one jurisdiction to another, if they're following U.S. rules and moving into Canadian waters, they need to be aware of the rules that are in place there.
All right, thanks very much. We can go to the next now, Basha.
Thank you. We'll now move to the proposal C2. This proposal is about a constant DCY floor in the IPHC Regulatory 2A. And if we can bring it to the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, John. If you could speak to this.
Thank you. So on C2, requesting a floor of 1.65 million pounds for regulatory area 2A. I want to stress that the United States government recognizes our trust responsibility to the 13 treaty tribes in area 2A that depend upon halibut. The U.S. commissioners have supported that 1.65 million pounds for 2A consistently since 2019, and we still do. It reflects the needs of West Coast halibut users with minimal impact on the larger halibut biomass to the north, and it remains a small fraction of the Region 2 allocation. I'll note that stock assessment experts at the Secretariat have affirmed that a higher TCEY for Area 2A than what may be indicated by the distribution of the stock per the setline survey does not appear to create any conservation concern, and that historically variable TCEY allocations and declines below a certain threshold in fishery limits from year to year have in the past created significant uncertainty and hardship for the treaty tribes and the 3 coastal states dependent on the halibut fisheries in Area 2A. The United States commissioners still favor 1.65 million pounds for Area 2A. It's clear that a lot of thought and hard discussion has gone into arriving at that number. But we do have some concerns that trying to have an allocation fixed in regulations as a fixed minimum floor could create real problems for the commission. Of course, the commission's top obligation is to ensure sustainability of the halibut resource for the long term, and we have to be able to respond to changes in abundance. And if the abundance decreases, we have to be prepared to set lower allocations to allow the stock to recover and rebuild. And there's also the consideration that if Area 2A were to get a regulatory floor, perhaps other regulatory areas may want their own floors involving much larger proportions of the coastwide halibut stock, which could impede the commission's flexibility in responding to stock conditions. So the U.S. commissioners will continue to consider the need for 1.65 million pounds in Area 2A via the IPHC decision-making process in either annual or multi-year agreements between the United States and Canada, and would continue to view 1.65 million pounds as a very important need, but always with that caveat that under certain stock conditions, we may need to consider a different TCEY level for 2A, lower or conceivably potentially higher. So with that, Mr. Chair, we remain strongly supportive of that number and will continue to advocate for it, but I don't think we need to take action under this agenda item. I think we'll be addressing it tomorrow when we come back to the broader TCEY discussion.
Thank you, John. You covered a lot there. I'll just see if anyone else wishes to speak to this. Neil?
Appreciate John's comments, and I think we acknowledge the challenges associated with implementing this as a regulatory proposal. I think, though, that also, in our view, fixing a number is something we see as counter to responsible management of the resource. We all have to live within the availability of that resource, and sharing the conservation burden is what enables that to happen. Minimal or not, this is not an arrangement that could be replicated. It sets an unsustainable example. So there are concerns beyond this as a regulatory proposal that extend to the idea of fixing a number for an area, given that we are living with the reality of a resource that fluctuates up and down. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Neil. Does anyone else wish to speak to this proposal? I'm not seeing any. So at this point, I guess, John, we're not proposing to vote on this at this point in time. It basically would be tabled and left.
Yeah, again, I don't see that we need to have a motion or consider action on this, given that we will pick up the issue of the allocation area 2A tomorrow.
All right, we can move on.
Thank you. Moving to proposal C3. This proposal is related to limited consumption of Pacific halibut on board of unguided recreational vessels in IPHC Regulatory Area 2C. This proposal deferred development of the suggested regulatory language. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak to this? John?
Thank you. So proposal C3 is another approach to allow recreational anglers to consume and preserve halibut on board, and really has its own enforcement complications related to the daily bag and possession limits, and would make a pretty significant change for Area 2C, imposing burdens on anglers for carcass retention, and doesn't provide a lot of explanation or rationale for exactly how that would work. So again, recalling that we've just taken some action to provide some similar regulatory relief, a deregulatory action, and opportunity for users, I don't see that we need to have a motion or take any action on proposal C3.
Thanks very much, John. Is there a seconder?
Again, that was no motion, since I don't think we need to take any action on this proposal.
I guess I just wonder on that, I mean, we could go that way too, but we are declining it.
Well, we moved past C1 without
True.
taking a vote on that. But
That's
I
fine.
would defer to you, Chair.
No, that's fine. I think that concludes all the regulatory proposals, correct?
That is correct. This concludes this session on the regulatory proposals. I will just note that the updated text of the IPHC regulations will be prepared based on today's decision. I will be shared with representatives of both contracting parties shortly. The final text of the regulations will be prepared with the decisions made tomorrow, and then the document will be sent to Chair for signature, and then sent to both contracting parties for adoption and implementation at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Basha. So we've gone through the agenda, but there's a few other heads up that we want to provide you with what's coming tomorrow, and Dave's going to run through those items.
Thank you very much, Chair. So as you've indicated, we have concluded the discussions for today's session. Tomorrow morning, when we reconvene at 9 a.m., we have a number of items that need to be addressed. The first, there's going to be a session presented from the MSAB co-chairs on the MSE path forward, as well as to stimulate some discussion in addition on the MSAB structure. At that point, we're going to switch to the regulatory proposals that will be outstanding, and that's regulatory proposal A1 on mortality limits and regulatory proposal A2 component related to the fishing period dates. We will then step to the rules of procedure for adoption, then moving to a discussion of the IPHC meeting calendar for the next 3 years. And as part of that discussion, there will be an indication and a little bit more information about the 100th year of the IPHC, which will commence on the 23rd of October of this year and run until the same date the following year in 2024. And then the final agenda item will be the election officers for the next year. And that will wrap up our meeting agenda. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dave. Any other commissioners have any comments or questions at this point? Not seeing any. We're adjourned for the afternoon.